Hi everybody, welcome back to CMN 153. This is for our class for Thursday, and that is August 18th. And we are getting near towards the ending of the semester, believe it or not. So if you look below at the semester dates, on Tuesday we will talk about our last media unit, and that happens to be digital gaming, which means that Thursday of next week is when your final project is due, and also when I will be posting the final exam. And if we were meeting in person, you would have approximately 2 to 3 hours to complete the final exam. Obviously, we're not meeting in person, so what I'm going to do is to give you 24 hours to complete that final. I don't expect you to spend 24 hours on that final, just approximately 2 or so hours on the final exam. And you can send that final exam to me on Friday the 26th and send that via PDF to my email, much like you've been doing with your journals. And the final exam will be open book, open notes, so you can access things like your journals, class videos, our textbook, discussion forum questions. And it'll be an essay exam where I will give you a series of essay questions and ask you to respond to 2 out of the 4 or 5 that I will be offering you as options. So we'll talk a little bit more about the final exam next week, but basically it isn't an exam in which you are putting together dates and content that you can look up. It's more about understanding concepts, which is what we've been doing this entire semester, talking about how media influences popular culture and how popular culture influences media, since it works both ways. And I also wanted to draw your attention to the notes below because I've made reference several times to another communications class that I teach that's devoted to horror film and media and popular culture that I will be teaching next semester. And it will be an online class and similar to format to this particular class. And you can see that in that second section, I've also included a short trailer that I created for the class that's 2 or 3 minutes long, give you an idea of some of the things that we would be talking about that semester. So if you think you're interested in the course and you have questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. So where we are is with music, and I could have easily begun the semester with music, since music has probably existed since the beginning of time. But I wanted to specifically talk about music right after the section on television because of the revolution that occurred with MTV. And that really led to a resurgence in the idea of melding music with video. That's not to say it hadn't existed before, and you can see that I've got several clips for you to watch in the notes below about, if not music videos, at least music performances that have been filmed prior that had great significant impact in our cultural understanding of music. I wanted to give you a little bit of history of sound recording, and this starts in the mid-1800s, 1850s or so. This was when the French were beginning to do sound recording experiments. And then in 1877, I think about how important the late 1800s were for many of the media that we have today. 1877, an American, I'm sure you've heard of him, Thomas Edison, records his own voice and patents that as a phonograph. He used foil cylinders in order to be able to do that recording. In 1887, a German developed flat disc records and patented the gramophone for mass production. So now we're talking about music being available to large groups of people, the same music available to large groups of people. In 1906, the Victor talking machine created what they called the Vitrola, a machine that was embedded within furniture that would play those discs, or what we call records. In the 1930s, magnetic audio tape was created that led to things like sound editing and multi-tracking. 1940s, the wax and shellac discs with vinyl. The wax and shellac discs were replaced with vinyl discs. This is usually what we talk about when we talk about vinyl records. This improved the audio, and it also led to a longer playing time, about 20 minutes per side. And if you've ever had the experience of listening to vinyl, you'll know that it's a much richer sound than what you can get in a CD or even streaming. So vinyl's been making a resurgence because of that. The 1950s is when multi-track recording, where there would be two separate channels and tracks, came into play. And then in the 1960s, miniaturized audio tapes into cassettes that led to home dubbing. 1970s, digital recording. This is, of course, where we talked about the binary on and off signals, the ones and the zeros. 1980s, the compact disc or the CD that was thought to probably be the replacement for vinyl records, but that didn't end up happening, as I had indicated. And of course, the 1980s is when music television or MTV was created. The 1990s is when we started seeing media convergence and also illegal internet sharing of MP3s, and they were basically compressed digital recordings, which led to a whole revolution with the music industry about how to compensate artists fairly, and it's still under debate today. In the 2000s is when iPhone is so brilliant by being able to offer not just the iPod, but iTunes, where you could purchase downloads. And then in the 2010s is when we've got streaming, subscription, and sometimes some ad-supported access rather than ownership. This is where we get the growth of independent music labels and a lot of internet self-uploads. So, thinking a little bit about pop music or popular music, which is supposed to appeal to a wide cross-section. In the early 1900s or so, early to mid-1900s, that would be show tunes and folk ballads. So if you've heard of Frank Sinatra, who's known as a crooner, that was the kind of music that was in vogue at that time. And then the 1920s to the 1940s would be jazz. Think about artists like Louis Armstrong. This is Black American improvised music. It really is the only truly American music. In the 1950s, rock and roll, which was a slang term for sex, came into play. Probably Elvis Presley, and I'm sure that's a name you've heard of as well, and Little Richard helped to bring about this kind of integrationist and for Little Richard, this androgynous approach to music, in part because Little Richard was afraid of some of the racism that he could be experiencing, so he didn't want to be accused of being sexually appealing to young teenage girls, so young Caucasian teenage girls. So he tried to be as androgynous as possible. In the 1980s, there was another movement towards androgyny. And of course, Elvis Presley, while not black himself, was using many of the black rhythms. You might be noticing a pattern here. Every 10 to 20 years or so, there basically is a new popular music. It's generational, and I think the music of our youths, particularly the music of our adolescents, is particularly impactful. Music is one of the ways that adolescents express themselves and learn how to break away from the family unit. And I actually have an article for you to read, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, about the importance of the music of our adolescence, that even as we age, and I found this to be the case with myself, that music of our teen years has an incredibly powerful hold. Of course, our brains are still developing, and our brains develop until our early 20s, so I assume that that's part of it as well. But music is a wonderful way to express a certain level of rebellion in a fairly safe way. Though I'm not so sure individuals felt that during Woodstock, for instance, a very famous musical festival that was promoting peace, but that also was promoting drug use and sexuality. So it led to a lot of questioning by authoritarian institutions. The 1960s is what's known as the British invasion, where you've got British groups such as the Beatles. Again, I'm hopeful that these are names that are at least familiar to you, even if you don't necessarily listen to their music, and the Rolling Stones. And in fact, very interestingly, they were also doing covers from black artists. Also folk music, it was the time of social activism, think Joan Baez, and psychedelic music, think something like Jimi Hendrix and the drug culture. Again, in 1969, the Woodstock Festival. This was a New York dairy farm. It was 3 days, actually, from August 15th to August 18th. So we're at the anniversary, promoting peace and music. The 1970s. This is where you had the punk rock movement, things like the Ramones, Blondie. This was in direct opposition to what they felt was rock and roll's commercialism, or what had become rock and roll's commercialism. A New York City bar by the name of CBGB was very important for the punk movement. The 1980s to the present is where you've got hip hop. This was when there was urban rapping and sampling. Run DMC was actually the first hip hop gold record artist in 1984. 1990s was when a musical genre came out called grunge. Messy guitar sounds and very much anti-fashion. Nirvana is a good example of that. In the 2000s, there was a man by the name of Max Martin, who's Swedish. He's a popular songwriter for other artists, and he basically has created the pop song formula that exists today. And in fact, I am going to ask you to watch a brief video about Max Martin, because there literally is a formula to music today in the way that there wasn't necessarily in the past, when it was much more creative. The 2010s is when we had female pop artists who were exerting independent control rather than relying on the studio system. Artists such as Adele or Taylor Swift or Rihanna. Again, names I suspect you probably are familiar with. So, as I had indicated, I wanted you to either watch or read several pieces about popular music. The first is an article, and this is in section 5 of the notes below. It's an article from Billboard's Top Artists, and there is a ranking that Billboard has done. Billboard is responsible for the top 40, and the top 40 came about because 40 songs are what fit initially into a jukebox. But at any rate, Billboard has ranked, at least as of 2022, the most popular musical group in terms of sales, and that would be the Beatles, which it was last year as well. The most popular male musician in terms of sales, which is Elton John, believe it or not, and that was also the same last year. And the most popular female artist in terms of sales, and that is Mariah Carey, believe it or not, exactly the same as last year. So I gave you the article just so that you could see what their rankings were, more out of curiosity than anything else in terms of sales. There is an article that I wanted you to read about Elvis, specifically about a performance he did on the Milton Berle Show. This was something that was discussed in the television section. Usually they talk about Elvis as breaking all kinds of barriers, and they talk about the Ed Sullivan Show, but really it was the Milton Berle Show that led to all of the controversy, because that was where the camera, this was the first time that he was shaking his hips, and the camera person got the entire body image so that we could see him shaking his hips, which was very sexually suggestive, and especially for the time period, the 1950s, was considered rather scandalous. So I wanted you to read a little bit about this performance, his hound dog performance as it's called, and then actually watch the video. As you can see, that's also listed in the 5th section. It's 3 minutes long, and that was in 1956. Again, a completely different world. The world had not seen anything like Elvis and his hips. And then Beatlemania, and I believe this was something else that we briefly touched upon in the television section. And I can't begin to express to you the kind of hysteria that surrounded the Beatles. And there have been hysterics around other musical rock groups, but nothing like the Beatles. So there's a short clip, 3 minutes long, called Beatlemania, just to give you an idea of what some of the crowds were like, where police officers had to be called in. And then I wanted you to watch a little bit of the MTV Music Television launch, which was in 1981. And you can see that the video link that I've posted is a couple of hours long. I'm not expecting you to watch a couple of hours unless you choose to watch a couple of hours. I'd like you to watch the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds. That'll give you an idea of the very beginnings of the broadcast Nothing had been seen like this before. MTV, a station devoted just to music and music videos, where now ultimately music videos were as an important part of expression as the music itself. And you will also see the first music video that was aired on MTV in those 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Video Killed the Radio Star, a rather prophetic song. And looking back on it, it seems rather archaic, but I can tell you, living in that time period as a teenager, it was very exciting and very cutting edge. Keep in mind again that these were the days when MTV focused on music rather than on reality programming. The video that I was talking about, Max Martin and his musical formula, that came out in 2014, and it's 3 minutes long, and you can see the link there, and it'll explain to you how formulaic the music is that he creates and the artists that he creates for. And then finally, a short article for you to read about why teens need music that I found to be fascinating from 2016 and leads to our discussion questions. So today's class is going to be fairly short, but keep in mind you should be working in earnest on your final project at this point. And certainly if you've got any questions or concerns about your final project, please let me know. But your discussion question, which will be due on Saturday the 20th at 1 p.m., which musical artist or group did you or do you find to be the most powerful in your adolescence, and why? And I've already referenced the idea that the music of our adolescence is particularly powerful and important and symbolic. So whether you are in adolescence now or you are out of adolescence, what musical artist or group would you identify as being the most powerful in your personal journey, and why? So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. We will talk about video games next class, take the final exam on Thursday, and then you will note that there was supposed to be one other class on the 30th of August. It's labeled catch-up if needed. And that basically is an extra class that I had embedded in there in the event that something happened over the summer, so which would put us behind schedule. So assuming that nothing happens next week, we can actually finish the semester on the 25th, which is Thursday, when I'll be posting the final exam. So you will be submitting the final exam on the 26th, which is Friday. And then that means that we would not need to meet on Tuesday, the 30th. So we'll see how things go next semester or next week, but that's my plan. So again, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.